Every device you touch carries a secret weight. Your phone, your laptop, the battery that powers the electric future. Inside them sits a silvery blue metal most people have never seen, never touched, and never questioned. Cobalt. And here's what nobody tells you. Roughly 70% of the world's cobalt comes from one country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, extracted in conditions so brutal that the modern digital economy quietly depends on labor it publicly condemns. Here's why this matters. The clean tech revolution is not powered only by innovation. It is powered by distance. Distance between consumers and consequences, profits and pain. This is where the pattern begins. Cobalt was once an industrial afterthought. For decades it was used mainly in pigments, alloys, and jet engines. Valuable, but not strategic. That changed in the late 1990s when lithium-ion batteries became the backbone of portable electronics. Cobalt made those batteries stable, energy-dense, and durable. As smartphones spread after 2007 and electric vehicles accelerated after 2015, demand surged. Prices followed. And the world suddenly realized that one fragile supply chain sat beneath the entire digital and electric economy. The story of cobalt does not begin with technology. It begins with geology and history. The Congo sits atop one of the richest mineral belts on Earth: copper, diamonds, uranium, and cobalt, often found alongside copper deposits in the southern Katanga region. During the colonial era, these resources were extracted violently, exported cheaply, and governed poorly. Independence did not break the pattern. It inherited it. Decades of conflict, corruption, and weak institutions left the country rich in minerals and poor in systems. At first, it looked like a miracle. As cobalt demand exploded in the 2000s, Congo became indispensable overnight. Global miners expanded operations. Artisanal miners, individuals digging by hand, flooded into mining regions. Families followed. Children followed. The world saw supply surge and assumed progress was happening. Then the bill arrived. Here's what nobody tells you. Cobalt mining is not just industrial. Nearly a fifth of Congo's cobalt output comes from informal artisanal mines. Shallow pits, no safety equipment, no regulation. Workers paid by the sack. Children crawling through tunnels barely wide enough to breathe. This is not hidden because it is unknown. It is hidden because it is inconvenient. The danger wasn't what they saw. It was what they ignored. As cobalt prices climbed, so did the incentives to look away. Middlemen bought ore at roadside depots. Smelters blended artisanal cobalt with industrial supply. Refineries processed it into battery-grade chemicals. By the time cobalt entered global markets, its origin was indistinguishable. Clean on paper, dirty at the source. Let me show you exactly how this system works. Cobalt does not travel directly from mine to manufacturer. It passes through layers: traders, transporters, refiners, most of them outside Congo. China emerged as the dominant refiner, processing the majority of the world's cobalt into usable form. Once refined, cobalt becomes anonymous, a commodity. Its story erased, not secrecy, structure. This is where the mechanism locks in. Global brands source batteries, not minerals. Battery firms source refined chemicals, not ore. Each step adds distance, and distance creates plausible deniability. Everyone thought they were safe. They weren't. The system made moral accountability optional. By the mid-2010s, investigative reports surfaced. Images of child labor, testimonies of deadly tunnel collapses. International outrage followed. Corporate pledges were announced. Audits commissioned. Task forces formed. But cobalt demand kept rising. EV targets multiplied. Battery factories expanded. And Congo's supply remained irreplaceable. Here's why this matters. Cobalt is not easily substituted, at least not yet. Some battery chemistries reduce cobalt content, but many still rely on it for stability and safety. Scaling alternatives takes time, years, and the electric transition does not pause for ethics reviews. This creates the trap. Congo depends on cobalt revenue. Families depend on artisanal mining for survival. Governments lack enforcement capacity. Corporations face pressure to clean supply chains without disrupting production. Consumers demand cheaper devices and greener cars. Every actor claims constraint, and the system persists. Not ignorance, incentives. History has seen this before. Rubber in the Congo, gold in West Africa, oil in the Niger Delta. Resource booms arrive with promises of development and leave behind distortion. Institutions weaken. Local economies hollow out. Extraction replaces governance. This is where the pattern begins to repeat itself in modern form. Cobalt's boom distorted Congo's economy further. Currency pressures rose, informal labor expanded, environmental damage spread. Meanwhile, the value captured locally remained minimal. The highest profits accrued downstream to refiners, battery makers, automakers, and tech firms far from the mines. At first, it looked like inclusion in the global economy. Then the bill arrived. The global response has been fragmented. Some companies pledged cobalt-free batteries. Others invested in traceability programs. Governments proposed due diligence laws. Analysts suggest progress has been uneven. Enforcement remains weak. Informal mining persists because alternatives do not exist at scale. Shut down artisanal mines without replacing income, and communities collapse. Allow them to operate, and exploitation continues. This is the moral paradox embedded in the supply chain. Here's what nobody tells you. The cobalt problem is not a failure of awareness. It is a failure of structure. The system rewards speed, scale, and distance. It punishes reform, patience, and local investment. And until those incentives change, outrage cycles without resolution. Meanwhile, dependence deepens. EV adoption accelerates, grid storage expands, defense applications grow, cobalt's strategic importance increases, and Congo remains the bottleneck the world pretends it can't see. The danger wasn't just child labor, it was dependency without responsibility. As long as 70% of global cobalt comes from one fragile state, the entire clean tech future sits on unstable ground. Political instability, regulatory shifts, social unrest. Any disruption ripples through global markets instantly. Yet diversification moves slowly. New mines take a decade to develop. Recycling is limited. Substitutes are not fully mature. The world is locked in. And this brings us to the unresolved question that defines the second half of this story. If everyone condemns child labor, but the global system keeps demanding Congolese cobalt at scale, who is actually responsible? And what would it take to break the trap? Because history suggests that supply chains don't change through promises. They change when power shifts. Responsibility in modern supply chains is designed to dissolve. Here's what nobody tells you. The cobalt crisis survives not because anyone openly supports exploitation, but because the system distributes guilt so efficiently that no single actor feels compelled to act first. Here's why this matters. When moral outrage collides with structural dependence, outrage loses. And cobalt is the clearest case study of how that collision works in the clean tech age. This is where the mechanism becomes impossible to ignore. Cobalt moves through a choreography of distance. Artisanal miners extract ore by hand in southern Congo. Traders purchase it at informal depots. Transporters move it across borders. Refineries process it into battery-grade chemicals. Manufacturers incorporate it into cathodes. Brands assemble devices. By the time cobalt reaches a phone or an EV, it has passed through so many hands that responsibility becomes abstract. Not denial. Dilution. Let me show you exactly how this protects the system. Each layer claims constraint. Miners say there are no alternatives. Traders say they don't control labor conditions. Refiners say they buy mixed supply. Manufacturers say they purchase certified materials. Brands say they rely on suppliers' assurances. Consumers say they lack visibility. Everyone is telling the truth, and the truth still enables exploitation. Some analysts argue that this structure is not accidental. It evolved to optimize cost, speed, and scalability. Ethics slow things down. Traceability costs money. Local investment reduces margins. In competitive global markets, the firm that moves slower loses. This is the trap. Doing the right thing unilaterally becomes a competitive disadvantage unless everyone is forced to do it together. The danger wasn't what they saw, it was what they ignored: the absence of enforcement teeth. In response to public pressure, companies announced audits, blockchain tracing, and responsible sourcing initiatives. These measures helped at the margins. But artisanal mining adapted. Ore flows shifted. Informal channels persisted. Certification struggled to reach the most dangerous sites because those sites operate outside formal systems. The worst conditions are the hardest to audit, and the system learned to route around scrutiny. Meanwhile, cobalt demand kept rising. EV targets multiplied. Governments announced bans on combustion engines. Battery factories broke ground across continents. Analysts suggest that even with aggressive reduction efforts, cobalt demand could remain high through the 2030s. Recycling helps, but only after batteries reach end of life. Substitution reduces intensity, but not dependency. The timeline matters, and timelines favor the status quo. Here's the uncomfortable truth: Congo is not just a supplier. It is a pressure valve. Its poverty absorbs costs the global system refuses to pay. Cheap cobalt makes affordable devices. Affordable devices make political promises possible. Those promises depend on speed. Speed depends on sacrifice. And the sacrifice is outsourced. This is where history echoes again. Resource systems built on moral distance rarely self-correct. Rubber atrocities in the Congo ended only after global outrage met political force. Blood diamonds were curbed only after binding international regimes imposed costs. Child labor in textiles declined only when regulation and enforcement reshaped incentives. In every case, change came not from awareness, but from compulsion. So, what would compulsion look like here? One scenario suggests aggressive supply chain regulation in consumer markets, mandatory due diligence, legal liability for downstream firms, import bans on unverified cobalt. If enforced consistently, this could force investment upstream, formal jobs, safer mines, alternative livelihoods. But enforcement must be universal. Partial enforcement simply reroutes supply to less regulated markets. Another scenario points to technological escape. Battery chemistries that drastically reduce or eliminate cobalt gain traction. Investment accelerates. Demand eases. Prices fall. Artisanal mining declines as profitability drops. This sounds clean. But transitions take time. And during the transition, demand spikes can make conditions worse, not better. A third scenario is entrenchment. Public attention fades. ESG language evolves. Supply chains adapt cosmetically. Congo remains indispensable. Artisanal mining persists. Children keep digging. The clean tech revolution advances atop the same old foundation. This is the most likely outcome without structural shock. Some economists argue Congo could reclaim leverage by formalizing artisanal mining, legalizing it, regulating it, integrating it into formal supply. This could improve safety and incomes, but it requires governance capacity, investment, and political stability, conditions that extraction economies historically struggled to sustain. Here's the trap again. Reform requires resources, but resources flow out before reform can take hold. And then there is geopolitics. As cobalt's strategic value rises, external actors increase involvement. Investment arrives with conditions. Control over processing remains offshore. Congo gains revenue but not resilience. Power concentrates downstream. This mirrors patterns seen in oil, copper, and rare earths. Not exploitation by force, dependence by design. Here's what nobody tells you about clean technology. It does not erase old hierarchies, it reorganizes them. The minerals change, the dynamics don't. The child labor images shock because they violate the story consumers are told, that technology is clean, ethical, progressive. The shock fades because the system has no off switch. Without alternatives ready at scale, moral condemnation becomes a performance rather than a lever. This is why the cobalt problem endures. It is not a scandal. It is infrastructure. Breaking it would require coordinated action across governments, firms, and consumers, binding rules, enforced standards, real investment in local economies, and patience that markets rarely reward. It would require paying more, waiting longer, accepting trade-offs. In other words, it would require choosing structure over speed. Until then, the system remains intact, not because people don't care, but because caring costs more than the system is willing to pay. And that is the final lesson hidden inside the battery that powers your phone. The future is not just built from innovation, it is built from choices about who bears the cost and who gets to look away.